Whatever he was doing in the mountains, he planned on wrapping it up in time to still get to his family's house on or before Christmas Day. On December 13th, a hunter was driving along the many winding back roads of the Ruahine mountain range. He looks up ahead and he sees there's a car parked on the side of the road. He can tell, there's no one inside of it. And so operating on a hunch, he would contact police. And so the police kind of wandered around the area. There was no one there. They're in this very isolated part of this wilderness area. And so the police just took down the license plate of the car and they went back to their station. And when they got there, they ran the license plate number and it turned out the car belonged to Jason Chase. When Jason's family was contacted, they explained to police that Jason had made plans to come visit them around Christmas time. Maybe he stopped there on the way to their house, but they told police that just didn't make any sense. So as a precaution, the police decided to launch a search for Jason. And unfortunately, no trace of Jason was found. And so the official search was called off right before Christmas, but Jason's family and friends, they continued to look for him. And on January 3rd, they would find him. One of the family friends owned a plane. He looked down and he saw this bright red thing that looked totally out of place. And so the ground team, they made their way over to this location, which was quite far away from where Jason's car had been. They eventually walked out to this big open clearing. It was a dry riverbed, and right in front of them, in the middle of it, was the bright red thing. It was Jason's shirt, and Jason was still wearing it. They would say the scene was very peaceful, and it almost looked like Jason had lied down to fall asleep. But Jason was not sleeping, he was dead. Jason had no visible injuries, and there was no sign of a struggle in the area. In fact, it didn't even look like Jason had been in the wild for very long because his clothes were pristine, and despite being barefoot, his feet were in great condition. His shoes and socks would not be recovered. The only thing they found in the area was a water bottle that belonged to Jason. The pathologist was unable to find any injuries. Jason also seemed well nourished because he had food in his stomach and he was hydrated. His toxicology report also came back negative for all medications and a range of common poisons. Jason had 2 very small ulcers in his duodenum. These type of ulcers only appear from acute stress moments before death. However, these ulcers don't indicate what caused the stress. The pathologist concluded he had died from, quote, obscure natural causes. Interestingly, though, the pathologist was able to determine that Jason died on or around December 30th. Which means he was alive for the entirety of the official search for him, as well as the bulk of that private search conducted by friends and family. After the autopsy results came out, Jason's case was closed, and his family was forced to just move on. 15 years later, the same pathologist that had conducted Jason's autopsy was talking to a colleague about Jason's case. And as he was describing where Jason was found, the colleague suddenly stopped the pathologist and said, wait a minute, I think I know what happened to him. And it would turn out he did. Jason left his home and began heading south towards where his family lived. But before he got to his family's home, he took a detour up into the Ruahine mountain range where he eventually parked his car on the side of the road. He got out and collected his backpack and sleeping bag. Those were 2 items that were never discovered during the search or after his body was found. And then he leaves the main road and begins walking into the woods, making his way down the mountain. He eventually would find a spot on the side of the mountain that he liked, and so he set up a campsite. Whatever he was doing in the mountains, he planned on wrapping it up in time to still get to his family's house on or before Christmas Day. So from December 13th until December 25th, it's believed Jason was, by choice, out in the wilderness of the Ruahine mountain range. And so as this huge search is launched for him in the area he is in, it's entirely possible that he either did not see any of the searchers, or he may not have recognized that they were looking for him, because remember, during that time frame, he didn't think he was in danger. When he needed to leave, for whatever reason, he could not get back up to the road where his car was. Jason actually turned and began going down the mountain, away from the road and away from his car. It's believed Jason actually just decided he would hike his way out of the mountains. And he probably figured he could just hike the 8 miles and then he could have someone drive him back up and retrieve his car at a later date. But on or around December 30th, Jason was still out in the mountains. And at this point, He had abandoned his backpack and his sleeping bag and had most likely removed his shoes and socks for reasons we don't know. He just had to navigate a few more steep sections and then he'd be home free. Jason began slowly making his way down the mountainside until he reached a decision point. He found himself standing at the top of two very steep gullies that both would bring him down to a dry stretch of riverbed, and so either option worked. It just became a matter of which one is safer. He made his choice and he made his way down and he reached the dry riverbed. And it was at this point that Jason would have begun to feel a pain in his stomach. And that pain would have gotten worse and worse and worse to the point where Jason likely sat down on this dry riverbed, kind of waiting for the pain to subside, but it wouldn't. It would only intensify. His vision would begin to blur, and then he would start to struggle breathing. And before he could deal with all of these strange symptoms that were coming on really suddenly, he lost the ability to move his body and he slumped over onto his left side, and there he would lay until he died. It would turn out the gully that Jason had chosen to go down, that one contained a plant called Urtica ferox. This plant, which is endemic to New Zealand, grows leaves that are covered in little rigid stinging hairs that contain a toxin called trifidin. And trifidin, in high enough doses, not only causes stomach pain and blurred vision and trouble breathing, but it also causes total body paralysis and even death. Jason, who according to friends would have known about the dangers this plant posed, likely just didn't see the cluster of plants when he was assessing which gully to go down. And so it wasn't until he was partway down the gully and was in these plants that he realized his mistake. But when he turned to go back up, it was just too steep. And so he was forced to trudge through these toxic plants. And because he was wearing shorts, his lower legs were exposed and they were stung repeatedly. And so he was dealt a lethal dose. The reason the pathologist was not able to identify this as Jason's cause of death is because the stingers on those plants, they don't leave any marks on the human body. And its poison, trifidin, is so rare that when they sent out that toxicology report, they didn't include it. They did not test for trifidin. And so it wasn't until 15 years later when the pathologist's colleague heard that Jason had been found in the Ruahine Mountains that the colleague said, wait a minute, have you checked for trifidin? And so sure enough, they went back to where Jason's body had been found, and lining the gully that he had come down were dozens and dozens of those plants. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.